Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another conversation with. We have a very interesting guest today, something a little bit outside the norm, but very, very related. And we want to do more of these kinds of streams in the future, trying to get out into the peripheral and mix things up a little bit and try to promote a little bit of knowing a little bit about the people who work next to you on these jobs. And we're going to bring in David first, and then we'll introduce our esteemed guest today. Hello, David.
Hey, Brent. Before we start, I promised Mariana that I would ask you to confirm our next week's stream on Monday with Osama.
Oh, okay, no problem. I'll check it right after the stream. But it's gotten to this, huh? It's got to this that we now need to use streams to actually corner me and make sure that I actually commit. Okay.
It got there.
God, that's not good. Okay, good. Noted, Marianne. If you're watching, I will do that right away after this.
Yeah, that'll be great. As you said, it's good to start to have more different expertise and different point of view to our industry. So I would say having someone like Bobby, especially with his background, will be very interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a broken record with this. I mean, people who know me know that I talk a lot about video game animators who are serious about being video game animators. This is especially true to people who think they want to be a video game animator, but they don't know enough about it yet because they've never done it. They need to embrace the technical side of that equation. You are a liability as far as I'm concerned if you're coming into a game company without even a inkling of a desire. If you're allergic and you have this attitude of like, oh, technology is so annoying, and it's like you're barking up the wrong tree. Yes, there are some very, very talented engineers out there who specialize in the area of animation that will help you. You don't need to be like knowing all the things, absolutely not, but you do at least have to have some appetite for it. And Bobby is one of a handful of programmers or engineers or whatever you want to call them. They're not all engineers, because to be an engineer, you have to go and actually have a computer engineering degree. So, but I think generally speaking, everyone can, say programmers. I guess we'll see what he says about that. But he's one of the very few that I've met in my lifetime that I would consider a true animation programmer. And what do I mean by that? This is sort of a bit of an introduction, and we'll talk about this when he's on. But basically, it's someone who is absolutely someone who's going to be dealing with the code base, someone who's going to be working with code in the engine, whether that's a proprietary engine the company uses or whether it's Unreal. He'll be working inside that and doing programming like work, but he or she or they will be specializing in areas of animation technology. And that is kind of at the very, very, in my opinion, one of the sort of the leading areas of sort of research and innovation that needs to be done in order to make games play well, but also look good. The intersection at that problem is technology. Bobby's been doing it for a long time. He's the only programmer I know who's been making his own engine on the side. He's he is 100%, I think, probably equally a professional as he is a hobbyist. He loves what he does, and that shows on the job. So let's bring him in. We talk a little about to him directly about what his experiences have been and what gets him up in the morning. Hello, Bobby. You're very pink/red right now. I don't know why.
Yeah, I adjusted the lighting to be a bit
dramatic,
harsh.
Welcome to the stream, dude.
It sets the mood. It's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what started this whole thing? In your mind, I'm curious. I think you've probably answered this to me over a beer at a table at some point over the years. But okay, why engineering for a game? And well, let's start off with the first question: programmer or engineer? Or does it
I don't
matter
think it really matters.
There you go.
Technically, it's software engineer, which a lot of people claim is not an engineer.
I was wrong.
Personally, I just stick with programmer. It's easier because, I have technically, I almost finished a computer engineering degree before I got bored, and then I switched to computer science, and I did several degrees in that. But I'm not an engineer per se.
Doesn't really matter. If you make things go, then you get the job.
Yeah, title is that's whatever. Yeah. Some companies will call them coders, others will call them programmers, some will call them engineers.
Did you know when you were in school? Did you know that you wanted to actually get into work programming for games, or was it something that kind of came afterwards?
So I always wanted to do games ever since I was got into computers, in the early 90s. Yeah. I always wanted to make games, but I was living in South Africa and there was no industry. It was very unlikely to get an actual job in games. So when I got to university, I said, okay, well, it's kind of naive to do the games thing, so I'll do engineering. And 3 years in, I absolutely hated my life because computer engineering is not what I expected it to be. It was mostly signal processing. And South Africa had a big defense industry, so it was a lot targeted towards defense contractors, that kind of thing. And it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so I said, I'm going to take a risk. Screw this. I'll switch to computer science. I'll try get into games. Worst case, I fail and, oh no, I've got a computer science degree. How will I ever survive with that? Not exactly much of a risk. And so I did that and basically, tailored my computer science degree towards everything that was sort of game related or, runtime physics, whatever I could do that would align me in that direction. And then when I finished, I just shotgunned resumes across the entire world until, somebody gave me a shot. I'd been programming for 10 plus years at that point professionally.
Right.
And I'd been doing stuff on the side, writing back in the day, DirectX 10 tutorials because I was doing more rendering and my academic stuff was more AI. So, I was trying to get into the more AI side of things. And IO Interactive kind of took a chance on me and that's how I entered the games industry.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it Hitman that was the first game you worked on then at IO?
Yeah. I was hired, ironically, I was hired for a new IP. But then when we got there, myself and the core team of that new IP were drafted onto the crowd team to basically finish off the crowd. So I jumped in about halfway through the crowd development on Hitman Absolution, and I helped to build that. And that's where I kind of accidentally stumbled into animation programming. I was working with Michael Butner, who's sort of the grandpappy of motion matching.
True story.
And
he's not at UB anymore, though, is he? He was.
No, he's at NVIDIA at the moment.
Oh, interesting.
And I think he's working in Omniverse. I'm not 100% sure. But basically, through him, I was mostly doing AI, and I kind of got hooked on this animation stuff.
Yeah.
And
naturally, there's a huge overlap between AI and animation technology.
Yeah, to a large degree. It was just interesting because I was interested in always the navigation side of animation and that, and then in reality in games that basically ties into animation. There's no way of avoiding it. And so it was just a natural fit. Plus the time it was kind of, I blew through my tasks really fast. And then my lead technically was shit, I have nothing for him. Mike was I have a task.
Oh boy.
come help me port, the crowd to PS3 back then. And I was sure. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, but sure, I'll try. And through that, we kind of developed a relationship, and then basically he acted as my mentor for the time I was there. pretty much laid the foundation for all of my kind of thinking about animation, like what I still think is wrong and right and different approaches to things. Sort of like laid the groundwork for my entire career to some degree.
I'm curious, Bobby, when you went to school to learn coding, do you have any idea in your mind that, in terms of job afterward, what was it for you, like, oh, for sure, if I do this, I'm going to have work for, eternity? Or was it more like, that's something that is interesting and let's see how it turns out?
I always wanted to do something with computers and programming. So I was lucky that when I was like, 15, 16, it was right at the kind of height of the .com bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, everybody wanted websites and web pages and that and stuff. So at that time, I started working professionally as a web developer because, at that period of time, there was no skills. Everybody wanted the stuff. And so people would take a 16-year-old seriously. So I was consulting for large companies back home, making websites, doing backends, that kind of stuff, because I was available. I always knew I liked that aspect, like the problem solving, the building something.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to do it with the context of games. That was always kind of my thing. But I had no idea what specifically in games. And I kind of, I don't know, I picked AI randomly. I don't know why. That was sort of the thing that interested me. And that's the thing I was kind of doing. And yeah,
that was not a bad choice at all, seeing how the industry is evolving.
Exactly.
No, and so technically my actual my academic degrees and stuff are in AI. They're not in games or anything. I mean, I technically have a computer science degree with a specialization in industrial AI, which again nowadays is technically a good thing. Back then it was like meh, whatever. But
well, now that game are pretty much doing everything, and we're talking about the metaverse and basically building the Matrix, I would say any kind of skills in programming seems to be needed in game nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's the gateway was the AI, and then you started talking to Michael Butner, who as you said was you dropped it very casually. I don't know if everyone in chat knows what it is, but motion matching technology was something that hit the scene not so long ago, which is a very innovative way of well, why don't you do you'll probably do a better job than I would trying to give a high level description of what motion matching is.
So it's the most simplified way of describing it is that what you're doing is you're converting the motion of the capsule of the character, basically the desires in terms of velocity, heading, facing, that sort of thing. And then you're trying to convert that into what's the right animation clip to play, given like current animation state and these desires. It's basically trying to solve the problem of, hey, I'm telling this nebulous capsule thing to move like this. Find me a set of like animations that match this and provide what I need to do.
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea behind it.
Because traditionally we would build these graphs that make that decision very rigid. We need to predict what the choices might need to be based on a bunch of values or variables that are currently in runtime, like velocity and heading direction, things like this, and then just make blended sort of choices to another animation state that would play a different animation.
So motion matching under the hood is still doing the exact same thing. It's just now a black box, which is trained by some mechanism, whether it's a neural net or it's a machine learning thing. It's fundamentally doing the same thing. One would argue is that it's supposed to be easier and it works great and stuff. The problem is you lose the control.
Yeah.
Because now, whereas in the graph version, you could do a tweak, you could adjust a specific transition, you could control how one thing go. Yeah. With motion matching, you're kind of trusting the system to do it for you. Yeah. And often, I don't want to get too much into this, but there are a lot of issues with it. And there's a lot of like pros and cons to both approaches. Personally, I'm not a fan. I know that sort of I'm kind of the contrary one.
Not necessarily. There's a lot of people who are not a big fan. I think most people are saying what you're saying. It's like it's not the magic bullet that some people once thought it was.
No, but it's a fun tech problem, and that's one of my general kind of issues sometimes with the industry is that engineers a lot of times will jump onto a piece of tech just because it's a fun problem.
Yeah, sure.
Even if and a lot of the time they probably don't understand the whole like A to Z of the field that they're in, but they'll pick a thing and say, hey, this looks like a shiny approach to the problem that I have, but I don't really know the problem space. but this looks like the right thing, and so they'll jump in head first, and they'll invest a lot of engineering time in that.
Makes sense.
To try something out which
it's pioneering, right? Like it feels like real discovery as opposed to just sort of like solving already known problems. Maybe that's why it's so attractive.
I'm not even sure it's that, because a lot of the time these people are not inventing this themselves. They're basically saying, "Hey, I saw a GDC talk of some other company doing this, so let's go." You know, when Michael did this initially for the crowd, he was solving a very specific problem because there was, you know, like 3,000 agents that needed to have this solved. So he needed a very, very fast, simplified way to do this. And at the time we were using Morpheme, which was a relatively heavy thing, and you couldn't run that for 5,000 characters. So he built a very simplified motion matching approach that said, well, I have this little like particle that's moving in this direction, pick an animation and share it across the crowd. So that was a problem that needed a specific solution. And then it grew into this kind of, but we can extend it, and then all of a sudden it'll just solve all the graph problems for us magically.
You dropped another brand there, and I just kind of casually, I'll be Bobby translator for the rest of the day. Morpheme, by the way, for those who are interested in knowing what that was a technology that was actually quite old now. It's been around for a while, but you will have seen that kind of technology in games like GTA, for instance. Did Morpheme ever get in there? Because it's the same company that developed it.
Which was the
you're right. Same company though, right?
Solver thing.
Same company?
Yeah, same company, Natural Motion. They had like two packages. They had Morpheme, which was a traditional graph base. I would argue that that's probably the foundation for most animation graphs. Because it was back then, it was like decades ahead of everything else. And to some degree, if I look at what's out there right now, it's still ahead in certain aspects. Not that it exists anymore. And then they also had this Euphoria package, which was basically powered ragdoll kind of controllers, which is what GTA famously had, was when you get hit by a car, you know, you had this cool kind of blended animation physics response.
Or if you drank too much, they would simulate this sort of like drunken stupor that you were kind of losing control a little bit. And
that wasn't really a product as much as they sent engineers that helped you build this.
That's what I've heard. Because a lot of people were very unhappy licensing that software and then wondering why their stuff doesn't magically look like GTA stuff. It's a platform. It still needs to be understood and leveraged, right? I was saying before the stream, kind of coming back a little bit, like, you know, what makes like a lot of, like when I was new to video games, I needed to kind of figure this out on my own, but there's a big difference in my mind, or at least there has become a big difference in my mind between a programmer who is assigned animation related tasks versus someone who I would truly call an animation programmer, someone who specializes in animation related tasks. And one of the very organic, very analog ways that my brain would be able to determine the difference between them was something as simple as me being brought to a programmer's desk to validate a task that they have done, and I look at it awkwardly being like, are we sure we're done? Versus the experience of being tapped on my shoulder by an animation programmer being like, hey, can you come over, take a look at the data? Like, it's broken. Like, it's like, it does not look right. It's like the difference is such a world of difference. In my mind, from an animation perspective, from a directorial perspective, the big difference is really that you have an eye, and that might have probably just been developed just by working with it for so long, maybe you always had one and you just didn't know until you started working with it. It's probably a bit of both.
It depends on the personality. I think some people, like, I know engineers that they are only concerned with necessarily the coding, sort of like, does it function? Yes, no, that kind of thing. They're not so concerned with the art.
The gray area, the art.
Yeah, you know, they get a task, they say, well, it's functionally doing what it's supposed to, but, you know, like, I don't care about the rest necessarily. It's not something I'm interested in. I was interested in the how it looks. I guess maybe it's the AI too, because like you want it to be believable characters. So obviously natural animation, good looking transition, that sort of thing makes sense.
Yeah.
But also for me, like I am a creative person. I just have no art skills. And I admit that I have zero art skills. So I like to think of myself as sort of a enabler for those teams. Like I've worked recently with VFX teams, tech art teams, that sort of thing, to try to give them the best tooling and stuff to enable their art. But as part of that, I learn their workflows and their problem space. And I think if you don't do that, you can't really be a good engineer in that field, because the assumption is that, I can just do my thing and I don't have to give a shit about how their pipelines, their workflows, how they work. at all. And that's not true, because a lot of times right now, it's funny, I'm helping another very senior programmer who's like a genius in physics. He's learning about animation, and I'm helping him learn about animation by guiding through some of the code and working with him. And I'm noticing how he's trying to fix bad data in code. And a lot of programmers will do that. They'll be like, well, this data shit, so I'm going to hack the import. It's like, no, stop, hold on. Go to the animator and ask them, why the fuck is there 90 on the root?
Yeah.
Most of the time it'll be like, I don't know. I just imported it for motion build. I put a 90. Fuck it.
Yeah. It's like a complete black box.
Those kind of things where it's difficult, because you are trying to import data that's been authored by somebody in a very specific way into another piece of software. You need to understand how that data was made to be able to even import it correctly, to understand and parse what's there. And if there's a problem, you need to understand, is the problem on my side? Is the problem in the data? A lot of engineers will just add random shit until it works and say, yeah, job's done, cool. I can move forward in my life, and
it doesn't really solve the problem, though, obviously, because people are still producing the data in the same way, and that could lead to all kinds of problems.
And then you end up with like all your exporters in Maya, whatever, hacked, and people doing God knows what, and arcane knowledge of like, no, if you want it to work in the game, it has to flip this and add this extra bone, and all the kind of shit.
What about the other way around? Like, for all the animators that are listening to the stream right now and like kind of having their eyes widen to this whole concept of there being someone who programs, who is essentially enabling their work and making sure that it can look as good as possible in the game. What would be the core minimal skill set that I'm hearing that echo again. I don't know why. What would be the minimal sort of core skill set that you would expect on a technical level for animators in the video game industry today, in today's day and age?
Honestly, I don't think there's much difference in terms of like technical skill between, let's say, a film and a game animator. Where it comes in is understanding the application of where that animation is going to be used. I think that's the fundamental difference. I don't think on a technical and artistic level there's too much difference. The only understanding that needs to be there is this animation in a film just needs to work within my scene in the DCC. But this animation in the game needs to work within an arbitrary, dynamically changing environment. So that distinction is key. It's like one common struggle that I see a lot of film animators coming in when they try to do the transition is that they don't understand that, we can't have these settled. I don't know what I'm going to use certain animation terminology, which I think everybody has different ones. I remember talking to a anim director in the US, and I said a settle, and they were like, what do you mean by settle? Basically they'll do an animation with a large follow through of secondary motion, or sort of like subtle kind of, relaxation setting down. And in games, it's like, no, we can't afford that. You can't have like a 3-second long stop animation or like a 6-meter long stop. I know it's physically correct if you're sprinting to stop in like X amount of time, and then you have like velocity degradation, weight transfer, all that kind of stuff. But it's a game. We can't have you let go of the stick and have the character run off the cliff, right?
We could. It just might not be very fun.
Huh?
We could. It just might not be very fun.
You could, and generally then you'll have an angry Bobby at your desk going like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a really good way to
even worse, you'll have somebody that doesn't understand what's going on, yelling in a room saying, what the fuck, the controls are shit, we broke one.
Exactly. It's a really good way to make good friends with the design department, that's for sure. Sorry, David.
Friends, yes, sure. That's fundamentally, I think, in terms of workflows and stuff, it's fundamentally, I guess, the same for a regular animator. They get given a control rig and they animate using the control rig. The only difference being in games, a lot of the time they will have to animate the root, whether it's a separate locator or null in the scene, or whether it's part of the actual character skeleton. There's this additional concept of a root bone or a ground bone or a position bone or whatever you want to call it, which essentially is the position of the capsule in the game. That's one thing that a gameplay animator will need to do, whereas it's not a concept that exists in films or even in cinematics. And that can be challenging because a lot of programmers cannot explain what that thing is properly. They can't speak animatorese. So they can't explain to them, like, what is this thing? And that's always been hard, where it's like, okay, I often go make friends with the tech anim team and say like, hey, in the control rig, put a preview of a capsule where that bone is, so that they can see a capsule in their scene. And so when they animate it, they understand the relation of the capsule and the character. And then for them, it becomes a much easier concept to understand, because they're like, oh, okay, the capsule is where the game thinks the character is, and then the mesh is where the mesh will be, but it's not where the game thinks the character is. And then you can have presets for saying, okay, if we're crouched, the capsule's this high. If we're this, you would set some presets so that when they animate, they can position the capsule correctly. And that's a big pain point where a lot of animators are not taught this. They're not aware of this thing. And so we end up, the classic example is the crouched pose, where if you crouch next to a wall, your head's halfway in the wall, right? Because your capsule is here, but then your head is sticking out the side of the capsule.
You're leaning forward too much.
And so it's animated because, the root is projected between the hips or whatever onto the ground. But in that situation, that capsule needs to have been projected forward so that the head doesn't stick through.
Yeah.
Because again, the ass sticking through the back is less noticeable than having half your character's head stuck through a wall or popping out the side of a staircase or something. And it's those kind of things that have to be sort of explained, taught, position capsule. Hanging animations are another big one where it's like, well, the character's hanging, where is this capsule in relation to their actual body? And then the transition out, then that capsule has to follow a very clear path. And if it's just a bone in the scene, it's very hard to explain that. Whereas if you draw a capsule and you have your, you have your ledge and the character's hanging and then they go up, you can basically see if the capsule goes through the wall. And out here, you're like, that's probably what you want, is that motion on the capsule. You don't want through the wall and then up. And once they have the visualization, it becomes a much simpler concept to explain. But a lot of places don't do that. And so they just expect animators to animate the root correctly, and then get angry when there's like sliding between transitions or collisions where the root's going through walls and shit like that.
Yeah. So, Bobby, you've been in the industry for a couple of years now, and although you didn't work in all studio, have you seen any increase of awareness from the animators over time? Like what you're describing 10 years ago was new concept for most gameplay animators, but now it's more, most of them are aware. And
unfortunately not. The way the industry is heading right now is that we are basically filling a lot of the roles with less technical people. So what is happening is we've now created the second class of animators called technical animators, who are supposed to be the ones that understand this. And your regular run-of-the-mill animator shouldn't care about anything. They should just sit in a little scene and animate the pretty thing, and that's it. They don't know how it's used in the game. They basically just have an anime director walk past their desk and say, yeah, that looks cool. No, that doesn't look cool. And that's it. They hit the export button, and a technical animator will then take it and integrate into the engine. I think that's a mistake.
So do you think it's a general maybe lack of interest, or it's more from management that is not pushing to make sure that here's, if needed, we're going to create some, training around this to make sure that everyone at the very least are aware that this is expected, even if it's not the favorite part of their work?
I think it's more of just a hyper specialization. I don't know why we do this hyper specialization, but I feel that it's like people are trying to say, well, I'm important because I'm a technical animator, and it's some sort of gatekeeping thing. And it's like, it shouldn't be that way. I don't even understand the need for the technical animators, to be entirely honest. There is obviously technical animator is such a nebulous term as well, because it means different things to different companies. Like,
that's true.
Having a technical animator that basically just integrates animation to the engine. I mean, a programmer could do that just as well, to some degree. If he's got a good eye and he's got experience, they could do it to some degree too. Where technical animators are usually good is to kind of come up with how much coverage we need for a specific anim set, those kind of things, and then work with the animators to basically create the actual variations, the good quality. So they'll basically do like a block-up pass on a anim set, and then work with the animation to do it. There, I think there's benefit, but once they do that block-up pass, handing it off and just not explaining how the root should be animated, this kind of stuff, is also weird. So it's like, I would expect animators to understand when they animate something, how it's working, because I've been in workflows where animators will make the animation, hand it off to tech anim will then go through and fix the root at every single animation, and then put it into the engine, because I've often heard, oh, well, they're animators, they can't animate the root. You can't expect them to do what? Come on.
Yeah.
Like, it's not rocket science. Like, just show them, teach them that that's not a hard thing. I don't know why you have to gatekeep that shit,
Yeah.
Where tech animators, I think, make sense are the pipeline TDs. Those ones absolutely make sense because they are half programmers. They are, writing your deformation constraints. They're writing the exporters. They're writing all the control rigs, the IK switchers, all that kind of stuff. Those are technical. Those are more. They're practically programmers at that point.
Yeah.
I feel. Oh, go ahead. Do it.
No, I was just going to say that I think that hyper specialization, especially in big studio, whether a big AAA developer or a DreamWorks or Disney or whatnot, is something that almost by default is happening. So I would expect that in smaller indie studio, they have 2 or 3 animators. They are also the technical animators themselves. If you go in bigger team, 15, 20 animators, then you might have 3 or 4 tech animators that are in charge of being this bridge. So it's actually a question, but I'm curious to see if there's a different dynamics between those big AAA teams and smaller indie team that have to, yes, they don't have the luxury of having like 2 animator and 1 technical animator. No, they all need to do everything.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Like, again, personally, I would prefer that most animators, and I mean most of them, if I actually bypass their leads and sometimes like the tech time, I sit with them and explain to them, hey, I'm having trouble with these animations. This is what the root does. Come to my desk. I'll show you in the game how it works. I'll show you the visualization. I'll show you the issues. You can understand. And then they usually go back here like, oh shit, I understand now. And then they go back in 5 minutes. They fixed everything because now they understand. Which is why I asked for that visualization, because as I said, most tooling doesn't have that. So it's just some random bone. Same thing with animating anchor bones. I don't know what the terminology, but you know what I'm talking about.
Be able to pair things together in the game.
Yeah, locators that specify this is an interaction point in the world or whatever. Trying to explain to them how to animate these is also very difficult.
Yeah, because it's abstract to them.
Where you can just provide some tooling, some visualization, and just I think in the old days, they used to be, well, there wasn't necessarily this tech animator intermediate layer. So what would end up happening is an animator and a programmer would sit together and implement the gameplay feature. So the animators would, by necessity, be more technical because they're working closer with the programmer, trying to get the thing into the game. And so they have a better understanding of how my animation is used, how the controls map to it, all this kind of things. And they're sort of almost playing it as they make the anim. Whereas right now, I know a lot of programmers in larger productions, they just produce animation, hand it off, and then they don't know how it's used. They'll see it again in the game. Yeah, pretty much, Brent. Yeah, they wash their hands of it. But that's not because they want to. It's just that's the pipeline that we've built. So, and that's problematic. They make an anim set, and then if something goes wrong, they get blamed. But they don't really understand why necessarily. Or it's like, well, I did what I was supposed to, but no, you changed the distances, you changed the metrics. And they're like, yeah, but I don't know why these metrics exist. I don't know what I need to take care of. And a lot of the time, this is some very basic stuff that nobody would believe me if I explain some of the stuff that I've seen, where it's like being in like multi-meeting long arguments, trying to explain why we need a takedown that's on the spot. You're laughing. I wasn't at the time. But like multiple meetings in a row and a big fight and a big political mess.
Yeah.
Because it's like, no, we need to make takedowns that start immediately from the character. Yeah. No, it's impossible. We can't make it look good. We need at least a meter and a half. And it's like, what if the player is right here and you push the button? Do we teleport you back and then play?
Yeah.
What do you expect us to do?
I really feel like, unfortunately, animation leadership in video games have a bad name for themselves because of this. It's the same thing. It's an extension of a lot of the, and I wouldn't even, this is not an animator only problem. This is an artist problem with regards to understanding the technology enough to understand that it's not just making pretty things and sticking them in and they just magically work. There is a great deal of flexibility and adaptability that needs to be put into the plan on how that data is made so that it can be as real time and as functional as it needs to be. And yeah, I find that there's usually a lot of sandbagging on, but it's quality first. It's like, no, No, that is such an antiquated idea. I'm not saying quality is not important. You need to make sure that there's a plan where the artists and the people that are handling technology, like yourself, are somehow finding a way of reducing the compromise, like so that there's hopefully not a huge hit to quality, but certainly it should never be a hit to the actual ability to mechanically use the feature in the game.
I would even argue that if you really want the best quality, you have to start from a constrained problem to begin with.
Absolutely.
Because if you have a constraint of saying, like, this is the distance I can cover, this is the space, this is what I'm allowed to do, and you have that ironed down, it limits your problem space. So you can focus more on what's the best way to match this metric in terms of like motion and in terms of feeling and sort of time, versus saying, do a takedown.
Yeah. It's like, okay,
cool. I'm have the character somersault and spin. It's like, whoa. And then somebody comes like, hold on, whoa, why do I have a 6 second long takedown animation? Well, you didn't tell me not to.
Yeah. It's a true story. Yeah. It's like, funny though, because I often on the floor, I've watched this happen time and time again with some of my peers that are in creative roles, especially creative leadership roles, where they tend to get their noses out of joint when some of those constraints are added to them. They're like, they kind of they break out in a rash because they're just like, I can't like make it look good like this, as opposed to accepting that there is a certain reality that needs like the design, the mechanic, like you're making an animation for a design that has a bunch of rules to it. So right off the bat, there's that. And then there's, a bunch of technological constraints as well. It's almost like as if some people just don't want to accept that there are constraints because they either don't agree with them or they don't understand them, or a little bit of both.
If I wanted to be flippant, and this is a joke I
please
think you've heard multiple times said, it's like that a whole bunch of gameplay animators are just frustrated film animators.
Yeah. It's so true sometimes.
I think that's a very simplistic way of thinking it, but fundamentally it's like, for some people, within a game, it is a very specified domain. It has by its nature constraints, because you are not trying to make an animation necessarily. You are trying to provide a way to move your character within a dynamic environment and reacting to specific inputs. Yep. So the primary goal is to make the motion consistent, smooth, functional, and that. Like visual flair is a secondary priority. The problem is that sometimes gets mixed up. And so the visual flair becomes the identity of the character.
Exactly.
And the movement and the access is, that's kind of forgotten and said, well, gameplay will fix it or something. And then you end up with characters that slide everywhere. Yeah. Because the animations don't match what the game designers wanted. And so now we have sliding because you have this fight. And I think this is, again, where we've hyper-specialized, we split the teams. We have a lot of people that just work in their little domain. They don't really understand other people's workflows. Yeah. And everybody has a different director asking them to do different things. Like the anim director's like, quality, it needs to look super cool, blah, blah, blah. Fuck gameplay, make it super sexy. And gameplay's like, well, it needs to be reactive, like fuck animation, like what the hell is this? Like my character feels like I'm a battleship, when I steer.
Yeah. And all the people on the floor, they're trying to do the stuff. They're just like, what? I don't even know which. Yeah.
And then usually gameplay programs stuck in the middle going like, I don't know. Yep. Just fucking battle royale this and tell me who wins. Like,
yeah. It's going, just really quickly. I don't know what's going on with my throat right now. Let me get it. Going back to the topic of tech animators. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I just wanted to sort of put my cards on the table here because I'm curious how you feel about it. So I do agree with everything you said. I think that I think the only thing I kind of got hung up on was this idea that you don't understand the need for tech animators. I feel like this revolution of having like, well, let's address one of the things you talked about, that not everyone might not understand this. Tech animators is, like you said, is a broad term that different companies, different studios, different projects, even within the same company, have a completely different definition for. And this is kind of a problem because when it comes to recruiting, we will look for tech animators. And even though we write it in the description, we're still going to get a bunch of riggers, for instance, applying to that job description, or people that are pipeline experts, like you were saying, people that build export pipelines, and they build a whole facial pipeline that's meant to get from DCC into the engine. These are obviously very different roles compared to someone who is building animation trees. and graphs inside the engine. They're the ones that are, building up blend spaces, and they're essentially kind of architecting. Like they're in a way, in my mind, they're kind of like animation programmers in training, without the actual programming background. Like they don't know how to code, they don't know the syntax, but they're doing the lower level things that an animation programmer, like you said, could. But there is a little bit of stuff that you could sort of give them to sort of develop things out if they're working hand in hand with someone like yourself.
And this is what sometimes I absolutely agree, because fundamentally, like, an animation graph is visual programming.
It is.
The issue that is that a lot of animators don't have the background in programming or logic or whatever, so they don't have that skill set.
Yep.
And that's why a lot of times people complain, oh, the graph is messy, it's unusable. It's because somebody just went in and made spaghetti because they're so yeah, you can get more technical animators that are maybe better at building graphs, but they need to fundamentally still be animating too, because they need to add bridge. I think there's value in there, but there's also a very sort of painful workflow thing that sometimes arises from that, where a gameplay programmer would then expose some parameters, say, here, I gave you some parameters. The tech animator would then try to use them and say, yeah, this doesn't work for me, bounce it back. He'll add a couple more parameters or adjust them, bounce it back, and that loop is just painful. What I feel is a better approach is that initially an animator and the programmer will work together in the future.
Yes.
They will potentially build the graph together and the parameters, so that the programmer is building the graph while building the parameters at the same time, getting a first pass. Once both are happy, then you hand it off to the animator and say, like, here you go, tune the blends, tweak stuff, whatever. You've got your functional working version. You can add on top of that. But we've set up the graph logic. We've done all the transitions. If it's multiplayer, we've made sure that it goes in the right place in every scenario. Like the signals are being read back and forth. They get a template to build on top of, which is a much faster iteration, because a gameplay programmer is saying, what do you need? Oh, these 3 parameters. Are you sure? I don't know. We haven't done this. So
we don't know enough of the problem yet to even know what we need.
I don't know,
Yeah, full disclosure, I really feel like the future of game development, when it comes to animation's role in it, I really feel like tech animators are going to become just the animators of the future, in my mind. Because, hear me out, ideally, all the last few teams that I've helped try to build up, I've always put a priority on hiring people that are able to do the things you just said. Someone who's able to interface with someone like yourself to kind of architect the systems, understand the needs, but they also need to be able to animate well enough that they can at least build prototype animations. They can
So
get
I'm going
their
to
own
say
data.
something controversial here.
Oh my God, here we go.
I don't think that gameplay tech animators have any special skills versus regular animators. I think I can teach any regular animator how to integrate them into the graph.
I
don't think it's a special mindset. I don't think it's anything else. I'm sorry?
Is that a challenge? Because, I think I can find some animators that would break out in a real tail of a rash when you try.
Some animators that, but my point is that any animator that, understands the needs for gameplay and understands the domain, showing them a graph, especially like with the one that I built that's like relatively simple to use, within 20 minutes, they'll have something working, and over a couple of days of working with an engineer, they'll understand how this stuff works, and that'll make them a better animator for it, because they'll start thinking, okay, the animation they're producing, they're going to blend like this. This is how I'm going to sort of put them in the graph. I'm going to put them in a range blend here. I'm going to then blend here. This is the transit. They're already kind of thinking because they understand. Yeah. Right now, we have, again, this class of animators that have hyper-specialized into technical animators that are still sort of animating to some degree.
Yeah.
But they're more like prototyping.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily technical enough to build the gameplay feature entirely by themselves without the engineer.
Yeah.
And to some degree, they've potentially not animated in a long time, so they're not as necessarily as up to speed and practiced as an animator that's purely animating. Where I feel that in general lately, maybe I'm getting jaded or something, I feel that we need to stop with this hyper-specialization and start bringing the teams together and having more
overlap,
more collaboration and more working together, like we used to back in the old days, where it was like, when I was starting out and learning about animation, we had animators, we had programmers, and they sat together at like one machine and tweaked stuff.
Figure it out. Yeah.
Or they sat with 2 machines side by side, doing a tweak of the animation, exporting it, putting in the game, let's try it out, back and forth, let me tweak some parameters. And within a day, you built a system. The animations might not have been the prettiest, but they were functional. And then afterwards, you could make them pretty because... Yeah.
So let me just throw a problem though that I see in that particular approach. I find that I think you would agree because you just said this. I think it's easier to train up an animator and in general to be able to understand a lot of these skills than it is to find animation programmers like yourself.
That's the thing. So that term animation programmer is also a little bit tricky because it means different things to some people. Some people think an animation programmer is an engine programmer that deals with the blending, sampling, and that. And it's like...
And compression, and yeah, you're right.
Sure. But I mean, like an engine programmer could sort of do that too. What an animation programmer fundamentally is a gameplay programmer specialized in, he understands, they understand how the animations are integrated into the gameplay, how they're used, what they're needed for. Mm-hmm. So they're fundamentally usually a 3C programmer or an AI programmer that's doing with navigation because they understand how does it interface with animation? What kind of constraints do I need in animation? What sort of animation coverage do I need? And then they can work with the animator and say, hey, here's my problem space. Here's what I need to solve in terms of gameplay. This is the motion that I have. This is what I need to cover. These are all the kind of entries into it. These are all the ways I can leave. How do we build a sensible set of anims that provide coverage for this problem? Good gameplay programmers do that. They understand that. A lot of programmers, though, on the other hand, think animation is this super scary, complex thing, and it's not. And so they stay away because, it's complicated. They just, play animation. They play a single animation. They don't understand how anything blends or anything works. But then those same programmers are just not... they're not your superstars. What you want is somebody that actually cares, is curious, wants to understand how it works, and they want to talk with the animator and kind of get the best result from both sides. By a lot of the times, my best experiences in games was working with an animator and having a really fast back and forth of saying hey, this is the problem we're trying to, how we do it. And then we're acting it out on the floor and we're trying to figure out how many steps and how do we blend stuff. We haven't animated anything. We haven't written a line of code. We're just looking like idiots dancing around at our desks, trying to figure out, okay, well, if we do a start set, do we do bladed? Do we do mirrored? How are we going to do the starts? Are they going to blend together? Are we going to just do coverage and then warp them? Those kind of things where it's needed because it will define how the code is written. It will define how the animations are made. And we don't do that enough anymore. A lot of the time, people just want to work in silos. So sometimes animation will just run ahead and say, we mocapped all the shit for the feature. Hold on, design is half done. Well, what if you mocapped? Yeah, we got everything. It's ready.
Yeah, we got everything.
You don't know what? Yeah. And then you get the data team and you're like, I can't use any of this. Why did you do this? Or vice versa. It's
that's what, it's so funny. So Bobby is saying this so casually, but it's so important. It's such a poignant thing to say because this is illustrating so clearly the disconnect between departments that often happen, where you have an animation department that really truly thinks they did a great thing. They went and got a bunch of data, but they have there's no way that they got the data. Because how could they know? Because the data always needs to be shot, understanding how it's going to be used in the game. And so it is so when Bobby hears something like that, he knows that there's a good chance the data is garbage, because if he's halfway through designing how the system, how it's going to work, how can anybody be are they from the future? Do they know what he was going to come up with and then they preemptively shot the data to perfectly fit that mold? That's the question. Probably not.
Well, that was the one thing I remember. If you remember when we were working together, when we did a mocap shoot for that project, I'm not going to name it, I went to the mocap shoot with you and we were there together and we were kind of there were bits where the actor got a bit confused and he wasn't sure. And I had to jump in and say, okay, no, it's going to be like this because that's the motion, and that's sort of the thing that a lot of times engineering and gameplay is left out of the mocap shoot. They just explain it to an anim and then the anim director goes and he does the mocap, but he doesn't necessarily know the nitty-gritty of each feature or the coverage or how the animations are captured, and no designer is there, no programmer is there. So you get back the data and you hope it works.
Or you spend a lot of time bending it to make it work, right?
And this was the one nice thing when I was at IO that I think was a huge win, is that we had a mocap studio in the building. It It was a really small one with some terrifying features like padded walls, because you couldn't technically slow down in that space. So if you ran at full speed, your slowing down was slamming into the padded wall and hoping it didn't hurt too badly. But if we needed anim data, we basically just grabbed an animator, rolled some dice and said, okay, you jump in the suit, let's go.
Yeah.
And we went downstairs and we captured what we needed. And we were actually capturing with a metronome sometimes. We would put markers for where the steps needed to be. We would do this in a very methodical way because, you got the engineering mindset, you've got the art thing, you've got the style. These days, with a lot of the unions and the union actors, it makes it very difficult to have that workflow, because as soon as you have a union actor, you cannot now have any non-union actors. So you can't just go downstairs, capture some footage, and stick it in the game. It's
animators, exactly. You can't put animator footage in the game, technically speaking, because that's a non-union performer.
Yeah, which is absolutely frustrating. And
David,
I think at one company they signed up one of the animators as a union member and paid union dues just so they could get around this. I think there was some things like that where, and that's the loop you need, where you need to be able to say, hey, this is the data. Let's say even the block up pass in the animation, just jump in an X-Sen suit or a quick mocap and just do a block up pass of like, this is the timing, this is the distances. Yeah. This was the velocity. I remember when we were doing it, we had that velocity tracker that we were paying attention to when we were recording the run cycles. When we were at Game On, which again, I don't know if people are doing this, because then they get the data and then I have to have a conversation saying, yeah, you're 20% off the metric. Yeah, so that's what the actor ran at. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
Like, if you're running at 6 meter-seconds and you're 20% off.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen?
That's almost 7.5 meters now versus 6. It's a slight difference, And then you have to sit in Mobu and try to scale the animation to fit, and it's painful. At that point, you could have just keyframed the damn thing.
So, Brent, sorry. Before we move too far away from the subject, I want to hear your take on technical animators, because you're probably the biggest evangelist for this role. And I've never seen a bigger demand in the industry that we have right now for technical animators. So I think that Bobby did a great job for explaining his side of the perspective. So why do we need technical animators in your opinion?
I think I'm calling them something different so that we can identify them. I think that I would like to have more people that understand the things that Bobby's saying. Like, I don't want an army of animators that are like, oh, but like, what do you mean I can't put anticipations in a jump? It's like, I'm just getting old and I'm just tired of having to explain it. So I don't necessarily need them to be able to do all of the things and build a graph on their own perfectly, or like that's the ideal scenario. You have a bunch of like underlings underneath Bobby, but they also know how to animate. This is like a dream come true. We'd be an unstoppable force. We could make any game. That's obviously a bit of a blue sky vision, but I think at the very bare minimal, I want animators who at least understand these constraints. They understand these basic concepts that Bobby's been sort of just bashing us over the heads with all day, with just basic understanding of like, it's not this animation is not going to stay in Maya. And if it's not going to stay there, it's not going to just look cool in a play blast. It needs to be in a game. It needs to be somehow like warped and bent and like adapted to what's happening in the game in real time. And that is a completely different thing. And if only the people who get this at least understand how to work towards that. And I'm tired of dealing with people who are just either it's a spectrum of light that they either can't see or don't care to see, because it's just a waste of time. It's a waste of time, and we'll end up redoing it, frustrating the people who do get it, and it just makes the process more expensive and more difficult than it needs to be. So I know that's a kind of a bit of a pessimistic approach in a weird way, that I'm just and it maybe seem a little over heavy-handed to come up with a whole other new title to be able to solve that problem. But in my mind, I would ideally have a team of technically minded animators that understand this and become part of the proper force of positive force. People who get that they can't just go shoot motion capture data without understanding the plan first. People who just, they don't have to be explained that, they just understand because it's obvious. This is what I would want. And then there's still a place for people, because the problem is that people that are that good at that are probably not as good. Like Bobby was saying, it takes time and energy to get good at those things and to spend time working inside of animation graphs. And that's time you're not spending honing your craft as an animator. So I understand that it's very rare, possibly unicorn level rareness of finding someone who's really quite good at both of those things. So chances are you're not going to be a great, amazing animator, and you won't be able to be good enough to put the data in for shipping the game. So there's always going to be a place and a need to bring in animators of some level. But I'd like to think at that point the constraints are there, the systems are in place. People can explain what those constraints are to an animator who knows how to do high level polished animation data that will fit within a template. But the problem is you have a lot of those types of people on the project. The templates haven't even been made yet, and they're just making stuff. It's beautiful stuff, but stuff that will never play properly in the game. And if it does, it'll look like a dumpster fire and nothing at all. Like my classic saying is, you can give me a team of Pixar animators, it won't make a lick of difference unless there's a proper workflow and a proper understanding on how to make those animations in a way that will be game friendly.
And I don't necessarily disagree. I think that there is a place for those more technically minded animators. It's just that I think the theory is that if we get these people, now the gameplay programmers need to know less about animation because this technical animator group knows, and the animators don't need to know anything technical because now you have technical animators, and so you lose knowledge on both sides, which hurts the overall project, because now that technical animator, they don't know anything about programming. They should still be able to animate, but to Brent's point, they might have lost some of those skills. So it hyper specializes people into a pigeonhole where, if you're not careful, those people, like, their skills degrade in important other areas, and it becomes difficult. Also, productions fundamentally are not technically run anymore. So even if you have that group of tech animators, they're not answering to, they're not the ones driving necessarily the animation team. That's still the anim director.
Yeah.
So you then have two bosses potentially. You have the tech anim team telling you, hey, you need to make the animation like this, and you have the anim director saying, yeah, but I need more anticipation and I need more flair.
Right.
But I think that usually they will be in the same team, right? The technical animators and animators will be under the same animation director.
Yes, but the animation director then has to understand what their goals are, right? And when to ask for what in which context, and that can be difficult sometimes because tech animators are fundamentally answering to gameplay too.
Yeah,
and that's another big problem, because when tech animators answer to anim direction, they're not answering to gameplay anymore. So if the anim director is saying, well, I want polish and I want longer animation, I want anticipation, tech anim, what are they doing? And that can cause a lot of friction sometimes between teams.
You're speaking from, and I I happen to know this because we worked together at a few projects, and you're speaking a lot from past experience, and I think a lot of these things can be theoretically solved by having the right type of leadership, right? I mean, I think if you had an animation director who understands all these things and understands that that's the point, and they won't be antagonistic to these other things, then theoretically it can work. It's just, unfortunately, in practice, it obviously very often does not. These teams do tend to silo. They tend to start sandbagging a little bit, and animation directors, I know many of them that have kind of, unfortunately, really tarnished the reputation and trust of just animation in general on a video game, because they are unfortunately not coming to the table and going, hey, look, we get it, this is a freaking game, we are here to try to make it look as good as we can within reason, because it is a game and there's features and the character has to do things. So, but not everyone thinks like that. I've seen it with my own eyes.
To be fair, the same is true of gameplay and game directors, because the exact thing is happening where they're like, I want super activity. It's like, yeah, but we can't make it look good. I don't care.
Totally.
What's that one game everybody uses, which it's super fluid, but it looks awful. The robot game that from Platinum that everybody uses is the example of like, oh, these super amazing controls and stuff. But yeah, it's the animations popping left, right, and center, characters turning, they're sliding everywhere. Huh? Vanquish. That's it. Vanquish.
Look at, I know that. I can speak Bobby's mind here.
But that's true of the game director too, where they're like, reactivity is over everything, and then it's like, well,
it's true.
Then that's hard, and this is where it's like,
You're totally right.
It's a leadership issue. It's just sometimes the way we structure our teams, we set ourselves up to fail to some degree, because we give two different people a direction over separate teams, which they're supposed to work together. And then oftentimes necessarily the two directors may not agree with one another. Yeah. And again, it's always a people issue in games. It's always a people issue.
I would say this is the perspective from someone that's been in game for a few years, but more on the cinematic side. So it's almost like, okay, the little film team within the when you're coming from the film industry, that it's fairly like clear what is your role and who you have to report to and what is your job, and you take the relay here and you pass it there, and when everyone is done, you have the movie at the end. You go into video game, especially AAA video game, that has hundreds of people, and it's just a crazy marathon with every department that needs to work with every department, the directors that need to ideally get along enough that they can have good decision, a good debate of, okay, well, here's how we're going to approach this problem. I understand that you're not going to have your way completely, it's not going to be mine, but we're going to find a good solution for the game. I think that 10 years from now, we're still going to debate what is the perfect recipe for having everyone work together. It's such, because as you said, Bobby, it's managing people. The problem, and that's something that we often joked about with Daryl, and we're like, because people. This is why we're here, is because those two individuals there didn't want to have this discussion to solve this a month ago, and now we have to deal with all of this. It's a pretty big challenge.
Yep. The way things overlap and the way things sort of intertwine in video game productions really exasperates that. Because like you said, at least in a film production, it tends to be a little bit more linear. It's not to say you don't have multiple people giving you direction, but at least it's still always moving in a very typically linear path, where video games, it's like it's all over the place. Everything is interconnected, and it's so if you don't have a bunch of people, Bobby's 1,000,000% right. You can't solve this just on the one side. It's the entire culture of the entire team. They all need to understand that they all need to find some sort of overlap. They need to work somehow. It's like, often I work on games and it feels like every department's making a different version of the same game. And it's like, because they're interpreting it through their lens, they're forgetting to look through the other lens a little bit enough to understand, oh, I get it. Yeah, of course. And it's like, you can't have a design department that's pushing for 100% reactivity, and then an art department that's looking for photoreal, and then an animation department that's like torn between these two things. They want to make it look like the art, but they want to follow direction of the actual game and asking for things that are like Mario Brothers. And it's like, how do you parse that? And that has to do with a singular understanding from a high level game directorship, understanding this is they need to be communicating that to their departments, so that there is a balance to the whole thing, and everyone understands there's going to be a little bit of compromise on all sides. There's no way of having.
And this is sort of where, again, the lack of technical skills is starting to bite us in the ass a little bit, because if most animators were a bit more technical, understood how the animations would be used in the game, when for example, you can't expect an animator to always have every gameplay feature in mind and everything. So they can say, hey, it would be cool if you had some anticipation, and they're like, no, but we can't, because the way that this is used in the game, this is going to cause a delay, blah, blah, blah. And the animation can be like, okay, that's a good point. Then we can try to solve in a different route. Let's figure out where the better. And that's where we don't have, because a lot of animators just don't know how animation, they don't have that reflex. Used. Yeah. And so the anime director says, yeah, I like a bit of anticipation, because they're not even necessarily saying that they're not doing anything overtly kind of conscious. They're just like, I'm seeing this thing in Maya. I think it could use a bit of thing here. I don't have the context of how it's used where and what it's going to do.
Totally.
So his feedback, or their feedback at that time, is perfectly valid.
Yep.
The problem is that when the animator that's building this feature doesn't understand how this feature works or is used, because it's a tech animator that's involved, and he's there, God knows where, at that moment.
He's on vacation, I think.
They can't say, hey, hold on, no, look, we can't do that because of that. And that's where a lot of problems come in, because then the animations get adjusted. They go in the game, they fuck up the thing, goes back to Tech Anim. Tech Anim's like, what the fuck? We gave you specific metrics. He goes back to the animator says, well, no, the animator told me to change it. So, and then you have this massive loop that just frustrates everybody, where it would be better if people, and so the same thing with art. Like, now we have tech art and art. Right, and so art just goes crazy, and we have like 200K polygon screws and 50 of them on a manifold cover.
Oh man!
And then tech art's pulling out their hair, going like, "I don't understand what the fuck is going on."
I'm sure those screws look awesome though.
Yeah, but people don't understand necessarily each other's work and how it fits together. And we're hyper specializing to the point where, for example, like character artists don't know how to rig anymore or skin, right? They just make a mesh and then it's handed off to somebody else that doesn't know how to make, art anymore, but they just know how to rig. And then it gets handed off to somebody else that says, okay, now I'm going to put a control rig on this. And then it gets handed off to an animator that just knows how to use a control rig and nothing else.
What could possibly go wrong, Bobby? I don't understand.
Funny story.
Oh boy. Anecdote
right now
time.
in Ubisoft, there is this role called a level artist, which by some team's definition, it's not an environment artist, so they don't make art.
Okay.
But it's not a level designer, so they don't make levels.
Okay.
So all they do is they take ready-made environment art and a block-up level, and they put it in the level. So they basically just decorate stuff. And now these people, when they leave Ubi, they can't necessarily find work because they're not a level designer and they're not an environment artist. They can't do either of his jobs anymore. Maybe they could.
They can only work in another Ubisoft.
But they haven't done it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so now they've hyper-specialized into a role where they've made themselves sort of unhireable. Now they're in a position where they have to relearn either one of those two roles. And that's sort of happening where, like, I'm trying to go indie right now. If I find maybe I find a really good character artist, but they can't rig, or skin. So now it's like, okay, do I have to hire a person just to like rig and skin?
Yeah. 10 different people just to get a character in the game.
Yeah. Or maybe I get a really good animator, but they don't know how to make a control rig anymore. Now it's like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Do I contract out a control rig? Do I, and it's these problems where I think it's not maybe sexy work and it's not what people want to be doing, but I think there's value in knowing how those things work, because once you hit an issue, you can fix it. You can understand what's going on. You have a better, you can also I think it's ridiculous to also assume that a director can understand every aspect of every thing. And they need people on their team to basically say, hey, hold on, you forgot about this, or you didn't think about this aspect, or hey, hold on, remember we have to know, like, oh shit, yeah. It's more of a collaboration, and they're basically ensuring consistency rather than micro directing every aspect.
Absolutely.
But that's a very hard skill, and it's a very different type of personality to find. And that's kind of the gist of it, is you need good people. And I've met a lot of young animators that are just coming into the industry that they're eager. They want to learn. They're like sponges. They want to soak up everything. And, and I know from a fact where, you talk to them, because sometimes I've had to go to them directly and not go through tech, Adam. And it's clear that they don't understand what the problems are. And then you spend 15, 20 minutes, you show them the graph, you show them the game, and they're like, oh, I completely understand. Oh yeah, I wish somebody had explained this to me. Now I understand what this roots thing is. I understand how I need to animate it and blah, blah, blah. And then, 15 minutes later, they fix the whole anim set. And it's like, oh, wow, okay, But before that would be a multi-step process of explaining to tech anim, them looking at the animation, saying, oh yeah, it's probably wrong. Them go, I just, all the kind of best people I've worked with are people that are more curious, and they kind of understand a little bit. They don't have to be experts at that thing. They just need to understand
how it all fits together, at least.
How something works, Like, I know how rigging and skinning in theory works, but don't ask me to. I can barely work the camera in Maya,
So Bertie, Bobby, I'm curious. You mentioned that you're going now more indie. What is the story there? What's the motivation? I'm going from this big, because you've been, as far as I know, you've been in big studio AAA production for most of your video game career, and now it's almost like, all right, let me go and try this other thing. What's the story there?
I can't even be original. It's the typical, like, I'm a little bit tired and frustrated with large teams and large productions. I want to just do something still kind of high quality and still like polished, but more focused, and basically just pick our battles. Basically have a small technical team where we're going to have a lot more creative freedom on an individual basis, and sort of like build something together where, for example, the animator has a say in the design. If they feel that the design can be adjusted to suit the animations, we can do that. Or if the design, the programmer is the designer, the programmer can say, hey, I actually had a better idea for how to handle this, so I'm going to do it this way, where we're not so compartmentalized. I want to basically do more like a naive co-op almost, where it's like, everybody has creative freedom, everybody can kind of work, but there's still a structure, a focus, where I guess it's the anti-AAA of the chaos. I just want a bit of order in my life for a change,
So why did it took 15 years before being like, all right, you know what, I'm going to try something else?
You had a big gambling debt.
No, I don't have a good answer for that one. More, it's like I'm not going to say I regret anything AAA. I learned massive amounts. I've been on a lot of canceled projects, primarily because they're all new IPs and games of service and all that kind of stuff. And over the time, I've worked with a lot of really good people. I've learned a lot. I've had a chance to learn about people's pipelines. And the one nice thing in AAA is that it allows you to sort of, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but learn on somebody else's dime and fuck up on somebody else's dime, because you can make mistakes, and it's like, sure, we will fix it and clean up, and it's not really that much of a risk.
Big companies can absorb the cost of those mistakes.
Exactly.
Is what you're saying.
And so you can learn, you can grow, you can, I've been very lucky that as part of my firefighting on lots of projects, I've learned about pretty much every pipeline. Like with Brent, I got to go and, be on a mocap shoot. At IO, I got to do mocap, and that helped me a lot with the animation work, because I understood where the data originated from, how it was made. I had some impact in how that was done, and I kind of want to go back to that, because these days we're, again, hyper specialized to the point that a gameplay programmer has zero say in the design anymore. They get given a PowerPoint to say implement, and then they hand it off, and then the designer said, nah, that's not what I wanted, change it, or it's, no, you misunderstood this, or no, and that can be frustrating for everybody involved. The designer has to sit there and wait. The programmer that basically has no say in anything, even if sometimes he knows what he's doing, will never work. Vice versa, they can't define how the animation direction for certain moves are going to be. So then they build a first version of how they think is going to work. They get the data, and then they have to change everything, because the data has different motion, and different parameters and stuff. And I just want to go back to something where it's like, let's build a fun toy. Let's build something where, this is sort of something we own, we care about. That's okay. It's going to sound like we don't do that in AAA. People obviously in AAA, they give a shit about what they're doing and stuff, but it's more like I want the individual to have a larger impact on the whole. I want it to feel like when the game ships, they're like, I affected all those things, not, I did a bunch of work for 4 years, and technically I can tell you that every feature works because of something I did, but I can't point to the one thing I did,
Yeah.
So it's probably the creative part in you, as you mentioned, in the you don't consider yourself an artist, quote unquote, but a creative person. So it's probably this itch that is getting more and more difficult to scratch.
Yeah, my favorite memories were sitting with an animator and dancing around the floor and trying to figure out how to build something, and then like getting the first version together and being like, holy shit, this is cool. I still remember when we were doing in hindsight, probably a bad idea, but it was fun at the time, where we had those really cool 180s. If you remember, Brent, we were even tweaking the blend pivot to get the exact thing to turn, and it was really amazing.
Yeah,
totally opposite to what the design wanted.
Yes.
But we had fun doing it.
We did. Well, because it was a tough problem to solve, right? Like, I mean, this you're talking about, like the trying to come up with a formula that would be similar to like the Max Payne style, like turning while shooting kind of thing. That was the problem.
We did that, but that was contrary to what the designers wanted in terms of feel. And this is where I want to be able to define some of that together and say, hey, what are we doing? And that's kind of what I want to make, is I want to make a Max Payne supernatural game. So by the way, I'm currently looking for an animation director or a senior animator that wants to get into that role. If anybody watching is interested, feel free to reach out to me. Ideally, it'll be somebody in Montreal. But yeah, definitely, looking to do something AA quality with like Max Payne mechanics, where we can have a focus on animation and a focus on gameplay, but combine the two, so it's not like the super slidey game with like some animations on top, and also it's not like Red Dead Redemption, where I want to fucking shoot myself every time I pick up a bottle.
I have a question for you, Bobby, because we mentioned that, communication, so whether it's between animator and programmers, or programmers and technical animator, and all that, often in video game, communication and people is the root of most problem. Have you seen a difference since everyone has been working remotely? In turn, does it got better, got worse, didn't make a difference from your perspective of what you observed?
I think it's split people. I think that it's actually split people into two camps: the ones who really love work from home and the ones who absolutely hate it. I am actually in the camp where I don't like this. I need the people around me. I need to be able to talk. I need to be able to sit with somebody at my desk and go through something together, which we can't do anymore. Especially if you're doing something like 3Cs, it makes your workflows impossible, because now through a Zoom video, I'm supposed to figure out how something feels. It's near impossible. It makes the communication loop longer. It's harder. For a lot of people, their roles were never necessarily that collaborative. So, for example, maybe an environment artist, they make their meshes, they get direction, they adjust the meshes. For them, maybe it doesn't affect them as much. But if you're sort of trying to deal with multiple moving parts simultaneously, it's difficult collaborating remotely. It's also sometimes hard as a programmer to work with other programmers, because now we have this burden of doing code reviews remotely. We can't just talk about it. We can't play at each other's desk with some physics props and say, okay, how would this work? It also isolates people, which has been one of the big kind of reasons for burnout and people leaving right now, where sometimes we have hard problems to solve, and that's across every discipline, not just programmers. And at work, we had mechanisms to relieve that stress. We would go for lunch with our colleagues, or we could ask a colleague to come sanity check something, or sit with us and kind of talk it through, or say, hey, can you help me with this? I don't know. Now it's like, if something goes wrong or you get stuck, you're on your own. They can only help so much through Zoom or Slack or whatever. And it's like, you also don't get to like relieve the frustrations with, the lunch or the going to get coffee.
Smooth things over.
Yeah, you don't have the disconnect as well with the commute. As much as some people hate the commute, I think it's essential to sort of switch off between work and home. Having work and home at the same place, I think, is a very dangerous thing for some people. I have mixed feelings. I know why some people like it remote, but a lot of people forget that necessarily their job is different from others, and like what might be a better convenience for them might be causing somebody to burn out and have like real serious issues. And I've seen that over the last year and a half with a lot of people, myself to some degree included. I'm an immigrant. I don't really have much of a network here. So the last year and a half has been extremely isolating. And with a lot of the stress from work and stuff, it's difficult to unload that because it just doesn't stop. We're communicating. Everything becomes an email or a back channel, or I'll get to it, or we can never resolve anything now necessarily.
It's not easy because we're obviously social creatures, and sometimes to your point of just solving issues, sometimes just you're getting frustrated, or you just take a break, look on the side, you have your coworker that is there, is looking at you, and say, hey, what's up? And then you start a conversation naturally by doing that. You're not going to go on Slack and say, dude, I need to talk.
I need to vent.
I need to vent. Most of the time it's just enough friction to not do it, so you're just going to keep it on your own and absorb and absorb. And I agree that this is something, there's a lot of tech that's been implemented. There's a lot of best practice, but solving this social issues, when I haven't seen someone to say, oh no, I got this, here's what we're doing to mitigate completely this situation. That
I think there's going to be a host of, we're already seeing the host of burnouts, a host of mental health issues right now coming out of this. I think people are coming to the wrong conclusion sometimes. They're saying, oh, it's a pandemic. That's causing some stress, but also like people are working from their kitchens and with no breaks, like between meetings. Like I've had days where I've started at 9 until one, I've been in a Zoom call, 4 different Zoom calls, but I didn't get a chance to walk from one room to another, get a coffee or whatever, because the one ends, I'm in the next.
I predict very big heart problems.
Yeah. Additionally, one thing that I used to do is I would kind of do a temperature test sometimes at the office, where I would like look around and see how like people under me were doing. And once in a while, I would see somebody literally in like a state of panic at his desk, because I know him, you know, I know their personalities all the time, and I kind of see it. I can see it in his face. He's getting like stressed and panicked and stuff. And I have to go to him and say, hey, what's going on? Talk it through with me. And then I realize he's like worked himself into paralysis, where he's like so stressed about he doesn't know how to solve this. So he's trying really hard to solve something that he's too stressed to solve. And I'm like, okay, get up and go. You know, I have to be like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, be like, get the fuck out, go.
Yeah.
Go home. No, but I go home.
Yeah.
You know, go home, take a shower, go for a walk. I don't care. Just fuck off.
How do you do that? How do you
like, yeah, I know how to solve it. I took a shower.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
You can't do that anymore. And so people sit there and they stress and they panic. And I've had
isolations,
I've had
coworkers in silence
message me saying, yeah, today I stared at my desk at the wall. I was in tears and I was saying, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not okay. You know,
it's the stuff we don't see that's the scariest, right? That's the problem. At least at work, it's like it's out in the open a little bit, you know, and that's sometimes also a problem. I think that the interesting thing that hopefully this will pave the way for is something that's a bit more hybrid, giving a little flexibility to work from home sometimes, but not all the time, you know, like, and so that it allows people some space when they need it, but also they can connect when they need to, as opposed to it being just like all one or the other.
Well, there's different thing. There's different people that needs different support. You have different expertise. And, you know, obviously I'm more familiar with what an animator would, but for me, if I was in a situation that, okay, am I going back to work or not? It would be 50-50, because I don't want to brainstorm on Zoom. I don't want to have all of those meetings with Zoom. I don't have to have those, you know, casual conversation just to make sure that but I also want to have sometime a stretch of 3 or 4 hours that I just put my headphone and I can, you know, and that's perfect from home. So the way to structure, maybe it's just afternoon or it's certain day or all of that. And then we think of parents that were maybe like 2 hours of commuting from work. I cannot believe that we'll see anything other than this flexibility of, well, for you, it makes sense to be always there. For you, maybe it's 80%. For you, maybe 20% on site, and you're good. You can do your own thing. And I hope this is what we're doing.
I think hybrid makes sense, but it can also cause. This is the thing. I know that I think it needs to be enforced, saying at least like you have the option of doing at least 2 days from home or something a week or something like that. But at least there need to be some days that we know that people are in, because if everybody can randomly pick whatever day they're coming in, at that point, everybody's remote again.
I agree.
And that's kind of problematic, because sometimes I you know, for an animator use case, every game production I've been on, there's been toys and props on the floor, you know, like a foam sword or a foam gun or something. Because sometimes when you want to give direction, you can't do it via, you know, just pointing at the screen and saying, you need to be like, okay, you do this, and then we're gonna transition down here, and then we're gonna sweep low, and then we're gonna, you know, pop it straight up. You know, you need to act that, because it's motion, it's physical. You can't just say, you know, try it over a camera. It's hard. You don't have the perspective of the feet. You don't have the, you know.
It's so true. It's funny. That's been particularly hard for me, because people who know me know that I'm very animated, and I'm always acting it out in front of a bunch of animators, typically, and trying to express what I think it should be. You know, that's also very useful to get, like, it's not just animators, it's designers and, you know, programmers as well. If we can all as a group act it out, it's a bit easy for everyone to hopefully start seeing the same thing in their head. Because if I just describe it in a bunch of text, there's a very good chance that it will be interpreted in wildly different ways, and just physicalizing it makes a big difference. And that's something I do all of the time at work, and it's harder to do from a camera. Like, it's like, it's like is the camera wide enough to even see it? And it's not quite the same. You don't see it in the same way when you're right there witnessing it in real time. It's been hard.
Yeah. And sometimes you need to be like, when there's a bit of a discussion or like a disagreement, you're like, okay, show me how you think like this is going to look.
Exactly.
Act it out for me. And then the person's like, oh, wait, I can't actually do that because it's physically impossible. Hold on. Let me rethink my, you know, you need that sort of, we're human, we're social. We need that aspect. And that's why I know, like, having a remote can, and for some roles, it can absolutely work. Like I said, some art disciplines where they are just crunching through data definitely can work.
Absolutely.
But for more gameplay roles, it's much harder. And something people forget is they say, "Oh, we can work." You can't do gameplay from home because you have latency on the controls. So you can't tell if there's latency or not because you have latency because you're remote. You know, how do I know if the game feels reactive or not? Is it my net connection? Is it like Videotron doing something to my network today? Is it, is it the game that's laggy? Well, I can't tell because I'm not right there. And a lot of times that's frustrating. There's the other thing of like working with the designer and the animator on a 3C feature, which is, AI is easier because, again, it's predicted and stuff. You're not feeling it. But on something where you have control of the character, remote just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's just, unless you're making something super laggy where it doesn't really matter.
Nothing quite replaces the feeling of just huddling around a screen together with the controller in your hand and like trying something and being like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't feel cool. Here, take a look. And then it's because then they can feel it too. And you're right there sharing that same experience.
And
it's very difficult
you can adjust it.
I know. To try to sort of, it's hard to recreate that virtually, that's for sure, or remotely. Hey, by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we are like literally dangerously running out of time. We got 3 minutes left. We didn't take any questions. We do have one question that came in from social, and I don't know if there's any questions in chat. I know we have a big fan, Pitar, by the way. You might have seen some of his activity. He's definitely drinking the Kool-Aid. He was actually in my iAnimate class not so long ago, and he has big aspirations for video game animation, and he gets it. He's funny. Like he's the whole entire time he's like, just tell me what I need to know. He's certainly not one of the types that would just be worried about only making something look pretty. I thought this was really funny too. Sergey, he's actually a professional animator, and he wrote this was when we were talking about how you need to know a little bit about like all the things, like it's a little like the Soviet Union, when you wanted a driving license, but you had to learn how to fix a car first.
Yeah, but that may have been a result of the quality of the Ladas and the Nivas back then.
True. That's true. That's a good point.
Granted, those cars you could probably fix with, I don't know, a hose pipe and some string. So
probably, it's like carbureted engines are a little bit of a different monster than the fuel injection computers that we drive around now. Okay, so let me just bring this one up here. This was from social. Someone had posted this in before we advertised the event, and people get a chance to sort of ask questions before it goes live. So this one is already kind of came up a little bit in the conversation today, but is it useful for a keyframe animator to get educated in programming animation? This is very specific, because I'm wondering if it would be helpful at all.
I don't think so. I think I think all animators need to understand how the animations are used. I don't think there's a distinction between mocap and keyframe. I definitely think that all animators should know how to keyframe, including mocap animators.
And vice versa.
Yeah, and vice versa. Although that said, some productions just don't use mocap even now. If they're doing more fantastical things or weird like robotic stuff, maybe mocap is not a skill you need because it's on your pipeline. Mm-hmm. But I've run across mocap animators that just cannot keyframe. They know how to clean mocap and use story in motion builder, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
But I don't think you need to necessarily know animation programming in any sense. If you understand how the animation works in the game, how the blending. This is actually one thing. It's funny enough. The amount of animators that don't understand how blending works is actually surprising to me. Where I've met some amazing animators that cannot visualize what will happen when you blend two animations together. Mm-hmm. And I wish that there were some better tools so that they could understand that. And that's something that like I always show them how to build a graph back in the day. Like I would be like, okay, let me show you how the graph tool works. You don't need to use it for anything else, but just make a graph. You can put an animation, put another, and you can see how it blends. Just so you can wrap your head around, as the blend rate goes up, how does the blend look with the feet? How does it look with the arms? What is happening with the root bone? That's surprisingly, you would think, oh, animators, they understand blending, but it's just not true.
I know. I think that the closest thing that you can get that's not perfect, but it's at least somewhat there is Motion Builder story mode. Like you said, like at least you can at least preview and start to wrap your head around the concept. So when you want to say, for instance, blend two clips together so that they can transition to and from one another, you're getting a pretty good dose of what it looks like in the game. And there's different recipes. Like there's a very big difference if you just butt two of them up against one another and then just try to, like, on a layer in that blend, try to match poses at some point versus literally overlapping those clips and blending two active animation clips together provides very different results. And there's a reason for that. And I think it's a good way to start playing around with the concept of blending and sort of like making it less abstract in your mind by just getting Motion Builder and playing around with what I just said.
Actually, I think that's a good point there for the technical animator case, where tech animators are expected to understand how animations blend, how helper bones, for example, IK bones or target bones will blend together. That's actually a very important skill. But I would argue that this is also a skill that the person creating the source data has to understand too, because they cannot make that data correctly without understanding. For example, if you remember, we had a relatively complex weapon rig because we were procedurally generating poses based on the weapon position and stuff. That was not a non-trivial setup where we needed multiple bones so that when they blended across on the correct axes. And they wouldn't just linearly, go through the character when you were blending the left and the right. That it would blend in an arc, and we had to build a special bone setup for that. And that's where a technical animator is very useful to understand this concept.
Absolutely.
But I would argue that I think animators should understand this concept to begin with. I think TDs do, because they're building control rigs, so they're dealing with this stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But a lot of the actual line animators, they don't. So I've had times where I've had to sit and teach and explain that, and they're surprised. It's like, oh, I didn't realize that, the poses have to match the root offset.
Yeah, which is so interesting because it goes to the heart of what they're doing, right? Like that data, to not understand that has such a huge rippling impact.
But it's not obvious, right? Because it looks fine in Maya, and they're working on clip by clip. They're not working on the transition between. And so sometimes they see the pose and it looks identical. They're like, I don't understand. I pasted the pose. It's correct. And it's like, no, but the root on one is here and the root on the other is shifted.
Yeah.
But the pose is, the pose is the same, but look at the offset between the pellet. But it's hard to explain. And if you don't have that visualization, again, in the tooling, everything comes down to tooling. If you don't have that, it's harder to explain all this.
Yeah, it's harder to validate, harder to understand, harder to do everything.
Sometimes programmers don't even understand what the root is, I'll be entirely honest. And then it's even more frustrating because then they give broken information to the animator, and you have an even bigger mess to clean up after that. Oh
yeah, for sure. So I guess theoretically then that, like, the answer to this question is, if you want to learn programming, then knock yourself out for sure. But I wouldn't put that as a priority over top of some of these other things you're talking about. It's understanding these concepts are going to be much more important. Like just even having at least some experience with getting your own animations into the engine so you understand how they're used is going to be a huge boon for you to understand the bigger picture of what animating for a game is beyond, obviously coding. I know a lot of tech animators that start learning how to code because they want to kind of almost graduate up into the land of being more like a programmer for animation, because naturally at that point, that will be the ceiling, is without understanding how to do that. That's what's going to stop you. We actually have somebody in chat here who works at Activision who's talking. They are a tech animator. They say, here at Activision, I do rigging, imports, bug fixes, tools, and a bit of everything. Animators make and put the animations in the programmer, put the animations in. The programmers and designers work on the behavior trees and the state machines from there. So looks like the way that they fit in is their tech animation status is almost a jack of all trades, understanding many, many aspects of all the things when it comes to animation.
Yeah, that's kind of a more traditional way of handling, where the programmers are the ones building the animation state machines and dealing with that, where tech anim is more TD work, like pipeline, rigging, a lot of those aspects. And animators, fundamentally, they just import and slot them into anim sets pretty much. And then that's a very kind of traditional way of working. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad one that we need to change, as long as that there's collaboration between the animators putting stuff into the engine and them in the state machine. I think that needs to be done together, so that there again there's an understanding, not just I imported my animations and I hit submit on Perforce and it's not my problem anymore. That's kind of an interesting. There's the other question that it ties into that I can see about, like, people with generalists, and if we're going back to that,
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
I would
David,
love.
Actually, one sec. Dave, are you okay with taking this last question? Because I don't want.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good. So we'll do this last one, and we'll wrap things up. Go ahead, Bobby. I didn't want to disrupt.
I was going to say I would hope so. I just don't see it happening. Depending, most larger studios are now looking for specialized role because in their minds that's what they need, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times I've heard an excuse saying we can't solve a problem because we don't have person X with this title. And it's like, no, but I'm telling you like how it needs to be solved. Yeah, but we don't have this person, so we can't make a decision. You're laughing, but
oh man,
but that's a big studio reality.
And that's kind of it. Like they've hyper specialized to a degree that they don't understand that one person can actually be a generalist. So a lot of times I'll get told, yeah, no, it's impossible for one person to know everything. It's like, really? I know lots of really good, let's say, tech artists, tech animators that understand the whole thing from the rigging part to the importing to the engine, because back in they're generally an older generation because they had to do it all, right? Because back then the tools were kind of non-existent. So they were the ones animating, rigging, sometimes modifying a control rig for a specific character because they needed some extra control.
Yeah.
Putting it into the engine, working with the programmers, tweaking it, polishing. They were doing that whole loop where now we have situations where an animator says, I can't animate because the control rig is doing something weird and they're blocked. Right. Yeah. And it's because they don't know how to fix it. So now a TD has to run along. Okay, what were you doing? Can you show me? Okay, this thing. Okay, I'll go change the control rig. I'll give you a new control,
Yeah.
And that slows things down. But I don't see us going back to that because we need people that are taught in a more generalist way. And now even I think the education side of things is becoming specialized where people are not learning about, let's say, rigging, skinning, control rigs. You're either doing character art or you're doing rigging or you're doing animation, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing the whole character pipeline where I have friends like that. They are character TDs and they were animators. They were doing facial rigs. They were doing control rigs. They were doing retargeting. They were doing pipeline work.
They understand the bigger picture.
Because they're working on the character as a character, right? They're not working on, I'm a rigger, I know how to rig.
Yeah, I think that good generalists are getting rarer to find. That's for sure. And right now, with the shortage of, studio are just happy when they finally are able to find someone to
put in a chair,
to put in a chair. So let alone trying to find a good generalist that's going to work with the others. So I think if there's some studio that can achieve this, is going to be okay. We're going to find the best artists / technician that are open-minded, and we're going to train them over time with a culture of openness. And yes, officially this is your title, but you also need to do this, and this. And by the way, you need to get along with all those different people there, because it's together that you guys will create something.
I would almost
it's going to come from within those studios, I think.
I would almost say starting out as an indie or a AA may actually be better career-wise if you want to end up in AAA, because you will have to wear more hats and you will learn a lot more. So by the time you get to AAA, you will be way more knowledgeable across a degree of tasks than somebody that started out in AAA. Because, and you will be way more attractive as a hire, because you might come in and say, you know what, I maybe not the best rigger, but I know how to rig. I know how skinning works. I can do this part of the pipeline. I've done this before. I built a control rig. It's not really my thing, but I know how it works.
I agree so much.
And on the other side, those that start with a super big studio that are very you just have to do this. Unfortunately, it can happen that you have bad habits pretty early, which means that it's going to be more difficult later on to be, just to be able to solve a lot of different issues. Which was going to be this precious snowflake that is just doing this thing, and unfortunately needs other department to deal with all the rest.
Yeah, exactly or that scenario that Bobby talked about. Like you might end up, being new at a big company and get groomed for a role that doesn't exist outside of that studio. It's like, it's, I really think that makes a lot of sense. I think that whenever possible, you should always take I've always told animators they should learn a little bit about rigging And also, depending on the pipeline, if you're in video game animation, you want to learn a little bit about how those animations are going to be used and how. If you're in feature film, then you might want to know a little bit about like the lighting department even, because typically they're the ones who take the work after you and they have to render it, right? And so basically just understanding how your work fits into the big picture is just as important as the skills you need to be able to do your job right, because part of that job being done right is interfacing with the surrounding machinery that works around you to make it all go. Bobby, I want to take a second here just to thank you, man. It was a very sobering conversation. It was, I feel like part of this was almost like cathartic for myself, just to like sit there and reminisce over some of the typical frustrations that exist in this industry. Because I know you get it. You've been living it for a while, and I guess I feel like one of the big motivators for you to start your own thing is almost like you've seen it to be done wrong enough that maybe it's like you just want to see. Kind of like whether or not like you kind of have some good solutions to that problem. I guess the best way to figure it is to try. Right?
I'm fully going to admit that I am a bit jaded, and like there's a fair amount of frustration over the years that has built up. But I feel like there's a way to maybe not. I don't want to say do it right, because I'm not going to be that arrogant and say like I can do it better. But I want to see if you allow people to be more creative, to express themselves more, to grow, and you foster that kind of a culture, like what could happen. Because I think, again, a lot of this is that if you have a culture, which is what I built on our gameplay team in the past, where we had a very open culture where I don't care about titles and hierarchy and bullshit. Everybody can call anybody out, and we would criticize each other. But not in a bad way. We would say, hey, like we'd come in a room with an idea, and then we would rip it to shreds because it's an idea. It's not us. We're not tied to that idea, and that's something a lot of people don't. It's not a skill they have. Like I'm Eastern European, so our culture is very interesting in terms of how conflict gets resolved. But in Canada, it's a very different approach. So a lot of people here have a hard time understanding that if you criticize an idea, you're not criticizing them. You're just saying like, hey, you didn't think this through. There's issues that, and teaching that whole like you are not your work. So we go into a room and people are more open, people are more willing to learn, people are willing to grow, and they know that if I make a mistake, nobody's going to be mad at me. They'll help me through it. They'll support me. They'll teach me. And that's kind of what I want to build. Half of my motivating factor is try to build a space like that and say like, what if I get a good group of people that, are curious, they want to learn, and I give them the freedom, not full freedom because that's chaos too, but freedom within their domain to express themselves, to learn, to grow, to try a new tool, to experiment with a new technique, but in the whole time kind of having a production mindset, so it's on the rails.
Yep.
I'm curious how that would go, and I really hope I get the chance to do it. But
it's worth the experiment, that's for sure. It sounds like utopia.
I don't know about that, but the last couple of months have been difficult for me, and it's like more and more like I'm realizing with the last year and a half, which has been hard. I think a lot of people have done introspection about what they want out of life, and I want to try to see if I can make a mark or change a little bit in my own way, if I can help change some of the culture, change some of the things, because we've all seen the news recently about some of the horrors. If I can try to build something where there's maybe a different approach or kind of a different way of doing things, it might work, it might not. I don't know. I'm not going to try to predict.
Worst case, you're going to learn something, right?
Yeah.
Worst case, you're going to learn what you'll be humbled by. Maybe some of your theories were maybe not quite there, or maybe you're going to realize that some of them actually do work out one way or another. You're going to be able to figure it out.
And that's kind of thing. You never know.
This is an official request to have you back. Let's see how things go, and we'll have you come back, and we'll have a retrospective on exactly how that actually ends up working out, for better or for worse. How's that sound? I love it. Okay, Bobby, thank you. Have a really good rest of your day, sir. David, same to you, and we'll see you chat on the next one. Have yourselves an amazing day. Stay animated. Cheers.
Thanks, Bobby.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for being here, chat. I know that there was a lot of activity, especially from you, Petter. I saw you earlier, and we were too engaged in the conversation. I was having a hard time. Like it's like when I have someone like Bobby on, it's like I've worked with him quite a bit in the past, and so it's like I just end up like, it's like it turns into a real catch up / kind of trip down memory lane. So I didn't mean to abuse you and not I think we got all of the questions. I'm not too sure. I think we might have missed one, but let me just scroll back because I remember seeing it. Oh yeah. So Zach's Manx, that was actually pretty well answered in the stream. So if you go back and watch it, I think you're going to get an answer to that question. That question was, what is a tech animator exactly? Is it more about putting animations in where they belong in game? The short version of that answer is it depends. It's got depending on where you work, tech animators can be very different things, but that's one of the things that tech animators tends to be depending on their job description. So it's a bit nebulous and it depends on the studio, but it can mean very different things. Okay. Well, I'm officially out. I'll see you on the next one, everybody. Cheers and goodbye.
Dun.